Drum. The Drum is a poem where one of the key themes is about appearance, or what people's preconceptions of war might be versus what actually happens in a war and the reality of war. And you see that through two contrasting stanzas. The first stanza is talking about the appearance of war, how the war appears to be for the thoughtless youths who think about it in terms of being heroes, and don't have an idea of what the war will actually be like. The second stanza talks about the reality of war, and these two stanzas are juxtaposed so that you can see that contrast really clearly, and it really helps to emphasize the poet's point of view. At the beginning of both stanzas we have the repeated phrase, "I hate that drum's discordant sound," and throughout the poem we can feel that beat of the drum. I hate that drum's discordant sound parading round and round and round. And that has the connotations of marching. It's the rhythm of a drum beat, perhaps suggesting that everybody is affected. I hate that drum's discordant sound gives a really clear viewpoint from the persona. They are in direct opposition to the war. The drum is perhaps sounded before the men go to war, and it's the poets or the persona's hatred of war and slaughter that they're really standing against. The discordant sound is this idea that perhaps the sound is a representation of everything that's wrong with war. A discordant sound is something that doesn't sound quite right. The parading round and round and round, that repetition highlights the monotony of the sound, perhaps the inevitability of death. Monotony, it's boring, and often war can be boring. It's not as heroic and as exciting as the thoughtless youths might think. It lures them, the drum does, from cities and from fields, suggesting that people from all over are affected by the war. It's quite an abstract idea in the first stanza. The youths don't understand the reality of war, and they've been tempted to give up their freedom, to sell their liberty for charms, for perhaps medals or honours that they think they're going to receive. Tawdry lace and glittery arms is also giving you an idea of what they are seeing as the ideal, their idealistic dream of what being a soldier would be like. Glittering makes the arms, the weapons, sound attractive and less like deadly weapons that could kill. When ambition's voice commands, we get the sense that they're wanting to be heroes, and the personification of that abstract idea helps you think of this situation as more romanticised, more idealistic, to march and fight and fall in foreign lands. You've got the alliteration there that makes it sound quite nice. It doesn't mention death, it doesn't mention dying a horrible, painful death with mangled limbs and dying groans like it does in the second stanza. So this is the first stanza, the view of the youths who are tempted into going to war. We then get the reality of war in the second stanza. It starts the same way, so that helps us to understand the poet's beliefs and how they're opposed to war. But then we get this imagery of ravaged plains and burning towns, ruined swains, ruined young men, mangled limbs, dying groans, a widow's tears and orphan's moans. So the reality of war is demonstrated with quite shocking imagery, and you can pick up on some of these adjectives and how it's been described. The personification of misery as well gives quite a chilling image of death, and you can compare that to the first stanza where ambition is given human qualities. The final line, to fill the catalogue of human woes, can be contrasted with the previous stanza, which is helping again to emphasise the impact of the war. Looking at an example question for this, you could have a think about how does Scott show the persona's perspective of war in the drum as a possible exam question. In that, you could talk about the juxtaposition of contrasting standards, you could talk about appearance versus reality, you could talk about the rhythm of the poem and how that's directed by the beating of the drum. You could mention personification and how that helps the contrast between the romanticized view of war that the youths have with the misery of what it's actually like, its actual reality. The tone of the poem is writing to attack, it's directly in opposition to war, it's quite obvious what the poet or the persona thinks about war themselves.